key gun was one of the earliest concealed carry firearms ever made, dating back to the 17th century. But this wasn't just any ordinary key, it was designed to kill. Picture this. You're a jailer in the 1600s walking up to a prisoner's cell with what looks like a completely normal key. The prisoner sees you coming, probably thinking you're just there to unlock their door. What they don't know is that key is actually a single-shot muzzle-loading pistol that could end their life in an instant. This thing was genius because it integrated a working firearm into something prisoners would never suspect. It became super popular with jailers from the 17th through the mid-19th centuries because it gave them the perfect advantage. The barrel was hidden along the key's shaft and the trigger was built right into the bow, which is the handle part of the key. These were black powder firearms, so you had to manually load powder, a ball, and primer every time you wanted to shoot. The calibers ranged from tiny .22 all the way up to much larger bores depending on who made it. Some of the later versions even had flintlock or percussion mechanisms to make them more reliable. Since these were all handmade by individual craftsmen, they're incredibly rare today. You can find a few surviving pieces in museums, but they're basically priceless artifacts now. What's crazy is that while functional reproductions aren't common, you can find some non-firing replicas made for display purposes. This gave jailers the ultimate psychological advantage because they could walk right up to any prisoner while appearing completely harmless. The prisoner would just see a guy with a key coming to unlock something, never realizing they were staring down the barrel of a loaded weapon. It's actually kind of terrifying when you think about the power dynamic there, but if you think a key gun is weird, wait until you see this next weapon that could take out multiple people at once. Duckfoot pistol. The duckfoot pistol was a late 18th century English invention that got its name because the barrels looked exactly like a duck's webbed foot. This weapon was designed to take out multiple enemies at once, and it's named after a duck. This thing was a multi-barreled flintlock pistol specifically designed for close-range defense when you were facing multiple threats at the same time. It typically had 3 to 4 barrels that were splayed out from each other, usually around 45 to 50 caliber. The crazy part is that all the barrels fired simultaneously with just one trigger pull. It was basically designed for crowd control situations where you needed to cover a wide area with lead. The way it worked was simple but devastating. When you pulled the trigger, all barrels would fire at once, creating this massive spread of lead shot or balls that was absolutely lethal within 10 to 15 feet. Beyond that range though, it was completely useless because the spread was too wide to hit anything accurately. Naval officers loved these things for dealing with mutinies because ships have narrow corridors where multiple attackers would be bunched together. Prison wardens and bank guards also used them for the same reason. Some models even had short rifled barrels to try to improve accuracy a little bit. But honestly, accuracy wasn't the point. The whole design prioritized putting as much lead in the air as possible over being precise. The downside was that reloading was a nightmare because you had to prime each barrel separately. This made it absolutely perfect for situations where you were facing multiple attackers in a confined space like a ship's deck or a prison corridor. You could basically clear an entire hallway with one shot. The problem was that these were really complex to make, so production was always limited. You can find replicas today for collectors, but the basic concept influenced later volley guns without ever really making a comeback in modern firearms. But this next inventor took the idea of multiple shots to a whole different level. Harmonica gun. The harmonica gun was an early repeating firearm design that Jonathan Browning became famous for producing in Quincy, Illinois, starting around 1834. Jonathan Browning created something that looked like a musical instrument but was definitely not for making music. While Browning wasn't the original inventor, earlier designs existed as far back as 1742. He became the most well-known maker of these weapons in America. This was one of the earliest attempts at making a repeating firearm, and it used this horizontal steel slide that they called the harmonica because of how it looked. The slide had multiple chambers built into it, usually anywhere from 5 to 10 chambers, and after each shot you'd slide it sideways to line up the next chamber with the barrel. This was a percussion system that let you fire follow-up shots way faster than traditional single-shot muzzle loaders. What makes this even cooler is that Jonathan Browning was the father of John Moses Browning, who became one of the most famous gunsmiths in history. Even though it was faster than single-shot weapons, each chamber still had to be loaded individually with powder, ball, and cap, which was still pretty tedious. Browning made these alongside regular rifles, and he was basically perfecting an early version of what would eventually become modern magazines. He made both rifle and pistol versions of the harmonica system. The big problem was that the whole thing was really bulky and you still had to manually advance the slide after each shot, which limited how practical it was. These are super rare today because not that many were made, though modern enthusiasts can actually find reproductions available for collectors. This represented a huge step forward in repeating arms technology because it bridged the gap between single-shot weapons and the magazine-fed firearms we know today. The concept was brilliant, but the manufacturing was too complex and expensive for the time period. While the originals are rare historical artifacts, the design was influential enough that modern reproductions exist for black powder enthusiasts today. But the next weapon didn't just have multiple chambers, it had multiple functions. LeMat revolver. The LeMat revolver was patented in 1856 by a French physician named Jean-Alexandre LeMat in New Orleans. This wasn't just a revolver. It was also a shotgun, and Confederate officers loved it. This thing was a cap and ball revolver that had a 9-shot cylinder, usually in .40 or .42 caliber. But here's the crazy part. The cylinder revolved around a central smoothbore shotgun barrel that could fire buckshot. People called it the grape shot revolver because of that shotgun barrel in the middle. The gauge of that central barrel varied across different models, ranging from 16 gauge in early versions up to 20 gauge in later ones. Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard actually backed this design, which is probably why it became popular with Southern forces. The gun had a selector that let you switch between firing the revolver cylinders or the central shotgun barrel. Since the Civil War was happening, they couldn't manufacture these in the United States, so production happened in Europe, mainly France, Belgium, and England. Only about 2,900 of these were ever made by 1865, which makes them incredibly rare today. Famous Confederate officers like J.E.B. Stuart carried these during the war because they offered so much firepower in one package. The major problems were that this thing weighed over 3 pounds, which is massive for a handgun, and reloading was incredibly complicated because you had to deal with both the revolver cylinders and the shotgun barrel separately. Loading everything took forever, especially in the middle of a battle. This gave soldiers unprecedented versatility in combat because you could fire 9 precise shots from the revolver and then unleash one devastating shotgun blast for close-range situations. It was like carrying a revolver and a sawed-off shotgun in one weapon. The weight and complexity prevented it from being adopted more widely, but modern black powder enthusiasts can still buy replicas today. Original LeMats sell for insane amounts of money at auctions, but the next weapon took multifunctionality to an absolutely ridiculous level: Apache revolver. The Apache revolver was created by Belgian inventor Louis Daulne in the 1860s. This weapon was 3 deadly tools in one, and it's named after Parisian street gangs. This was a multifunctional pinfire handgun, usually in 7mm caliber with a 6-shot cylinder, but it also had a folding dagger blade and brass knuckles built right into the frame. The whole thing was designed for close quarters fighting and could be folded up to fit in your pocket when you weren't using it. It was compact, concealable, and gave you 3 different ways to hurt someone depending on the situation. The design was all about versatility for urban combat where you might need to shoot, stab, or punch someone in rapid succession. It got its name from the Parisian street gangs called Les Apaches, who were active in the early 1900s and loved using these for street fights. Production continued until the late 1800s in Belgium and France, and these became symbols of urban violence during that time period. The gun itself had limited range and power, so it was more about intimidation and close quarters fighting than actual marksmanship. The 3 functions were pretty simple. You could shoot the 6 rounds, unfold the blade to stab someone, or use the knuckles to punch. It was basically the ultimate street fighting weapon for criminals who wanted maximum versatility in a small package. This made it perfect for the narrow alleys and crowded streets of Paris where criminals might need to shoot someone at close range, then immediately switch to stabbing or punching when the gun ran empty. It became a symbol of the violent urban underworld of that era. Today, these are purely collector's items, and nobody makes functional versions anymore. Make sure you're subscribed because this next one is absolutely insane. Lipstick pistol. The lipstick pistol was a KGB espionage tool from the 1960s that they called the Kiss of Death. The KGB called this the Kiss of Death, and it looked exactly like normal makeup. This was a single-shot 4.5-meter pistol that was completely hidden inside a lipstick tube, and it was specifically designed for female agents working covert operations. The way it worked was simple. You twisted the base of the lipstick tube and it would fire the bullet. It was only effective at point-blank range, which made it perfect for silent assassinations where the agent could get close to the target. Western intelligence discovered this thing in West Berlin in 1965, which is how we know about it today. This represents the peak of Cold War spy gadgetry because it had almost no recoil and could be completely concealed as an innocent cosmetic item. The production details are still classified even today, which shows how secretive this program was. Museum examples prove that the KGB used these until at least the 1970s, but we don't know exactly when they stopped. The effective range was basically touching distance, so agents had to get extremely close to their targets. The genius was that it looked exactly like something any woman would carry in her purse, so nobody would ever suspect it was a weapon. This gave female agents the perfect cover story because they could approach male targets in social situations while appearing completely harmless. A woman touching up her lipstick is probably the most innocent thing you could imagine, but in the hands of a trained KGB agent, it was lethal. This represents the absolute pinnacle of disguised weapon design during the Cold War. As of 2025, these only exist as historical artifacts in spy museums, and any modern versions or similar devices remain classified. But the next weapon was so weird that even the ammo was completely different. Dardic Revolver. The Dardic Revolver was patented in 1958 by David Dardic. This gun used bullets shaped like triangles, and it almost revolutionized firearms forever. This was a completely revolutionary design that used triangular ammunition called Trounds, which were plastic-cased rounds that fed from a 15-round magazine into an open-chamber cylinder. It basically tried to combine the best parts of revolvers and semi-automatic pistols in one .38 caliber package. The Model 1500 allowed super quick reloading and could even be converted into carbine configurations with longer barrels. If this had worked properly, it could have changed how all firearms were designed. The problem was that the custom ammunition and mechanical complexity made it a commercial disaster. Only between 40 and 100 units were ever manufactured from 1959 to 1962, making this one of the rarest firearms ever made. The whole point was to reduce weight and increase ammunition capacity compared to traditional revolvers, which it did accomplish. Unfortunately, it suffered from constant feeding issues because the triangular ammunition would jam in the mechanism. The triangular shape was supposed to make feeding more reliable, but it actually made everything worse. This could have revolutionized the entire firearms industry if they had solved the feeding problems, because the concept was actually brilliant. The triangular ammunition was both the gun's greatest innovation and its fatal flaw. Today, collectors pay huge amounts for these purely because of how unique and rare they are, but nobody has ever tried to make a modern version because the problems were never solved. But if you think triangular bullets are weird, the next weapon didn't use bullets at all. Gyrojet pistol. The Gyrojet was developed by MB Associates in the 1960s. This gun didn't fire bullets, it fired rockets, and it could shoot underwater. This thing fired 13 Mlad-inch self-propelled rockets that spun for stability as they flew through the air. The rockets would actually accelerate to 250 feet per second after leaving the muzzle, and the gun had almost zero recoil because the rockets were self-propelled. It weighed less than 1 pound, making it incredibly lightweight, and it could actually fire underwater, which no regular firearm can do. The whole concept was like something out of science fiction, but it was a real weapon that people could actually buy. The major problem was that it was completely useless at close range because the rockets needed distance to accelerate up to full speed. At point-blank range, the rockets were moving so slowly they might not even penetrate clothing. The ammunition was also incredibly expensive. A box of rounds cost about $100 in 1960s money, which would be hundreds of dollars today. They made about 1,000 pistols from 1965 to 1970, and also made carbine versions with longer barrels. The gun became popular in science fiction movies because it looked so futuristic, but in real life it was basically useless. Production stopped because nobody could hit anything with it. This was simultaneously the most futuristic and most impractical weapon ever created because rocket-powered ammunition sounds amazing, but doesn't work in practice. The concept was brilliant in theory. Self-propelled rounds with no recoil, but the execution was terrible. Its futuristic looks made it perfect for Hollywood movies, but real-world performance was so bad that it became a cautionary tale about innovation without practicality. But this next weapon proves that even modern gun designers can create absolute disasters. USFA ZIP-22. The USFA ZIP-22 was launched in 2013 by US Firearms. This gun was so bad it literally killed the company that made it. This was a polymer bullpup pistol chambered in .22 LR that used standard Ruger 10-22 magazines for ammunition. The design was modular, so you could attach lights, lasers, suppressors, and other accessories to customize it however you wanted. USFA marketed this as an affordable and revolutionary firearm that would change everything about pistol design. It weighed only 15 ounces, making it incredibly lightweight, and the bullpup configuration was supposed to give you a longer barrel and a shorter overall package. They promised it would be the future of pistol design. The reality was a complete disaster because this thing suffered from chronic jamming, terrible ergonomics, and serious safety issues that made it dangerous to use. These problems were so severe that they led directly to USFA filing for bankruptcy shortly after the launch. The gun promised modular versatility and reliable performance, but it delivered nothing but frustration to anyone who tried to use it. The bullpup design put the action right next to your face, which was uncomfortable and potentially dangerous when malfunctions happened. The polymer construction felt cheap and flimsy compared to what people expected from a firearm. This became the ultimate cautionary tale in modern gun design because it proved that innovative concepts mean nothing if the execution is terrible. A single product failure literally destroyed an entire firearms company that had been around for years. As of 2025, the ZIP.22 is remembered purely as a design disaster, and used examples are extremely rare because most people threw them away or returned them. But this final weapon proves that sometimes weird actually works. Calico M100. The Calico M100 was introduced in 1985 by Calico Light Weapon Systems. This gun could fire 100 rounds without reloading, and it looks like it's from the future. This is a blowback 22LR carbine with a distinctive top-mounted 100-round helical magazine that allows for sustained fire without frequent reloading. It has a collapsible stock and incredibly futuristic aesthetics that made it look like something from a sci-fi movie. The company originally designed it for law enforcement applications where officers might need sustained firepower. The helical magazine sits on top of the gun and feeds rounds down into the action in a spiral pattern. Production got halted in 1994 when the federal assault weapons ban went into effect, but it resumed after 2004 when that ban expired. The slim profile and massive ammunition capacity made it a favorite for sci-fi movies, and it appeared in films like Spaceballs, where it fit perfectly with the futuristic setting. Despite its unusual appearance, the gun actually proved reliable in testing and performed well for its intended purposes. It remained a niche market product because most people didn't need a 100-round capacity, but it found its audience among collectors and enthusiasts. The helical magazine design was actually innovative and worked better than many people expected. This represents one of the few truly weird firearms that actually worked as intended and found commercial success. Its futuristic appearance made it perfect for Hollywood while remaining completely functional for real-world use. Unfortunately, Calico Light Weapon Systems went out of business in 2024, so these are no longer being produced, but it proved that sometimes weird designs can actually be successful.